Hi everyone, welcome to this tutorial. Today we're going to be learning how to make this render with CINEMA4D. The tools you will need for this tutorial are a build. You can either have a schematic or a world file. We can use both. We're going to be using Mineways instead of GMC2OBJ because it's just easy to use and it works. And you also need CINEMA4D, obviously. So first of all, you open Mineways, like so. Then you have to load in the world. So Mineways accepts both schematics and world files. So you can click on File, Open, select the directory, like so, and just open it. Okay, so we have the world loaded in now. We want to make a selection. So you right click, drag, and there you go, you made a selection. You can choose the clipping parameters with these sliders. This is the height, like so, and this is the depth here. Okay, it's useful to clip when you want to remove stuff or if you want the file size to be smaller. Now, we can export the world, so just click on File, Export for Rendering, choose a name, so for example castle, and this is the export parameters. You don't want to touch anything other than this. You want to tick it. This option means that it will separate all the blocks and their subtypes in CINEMA4D. So those blocks are or for example glass or stones. Okay, and now it's gonna start exporting. We can see it created a few files here, and I'm just going to explain what they do. The main file you need is the OBJ. This is the one that contains all the geometry of the 3D object. The MTL file will take the textures and apply it to the geometry. So the textures are these three. This is the alpha channel, which is the transparency. The RGB is just the colors, and RGBA is the colors plus the transparency. So the one we want to use is this one. So before moving on, I'm just going to explain the interface of CINEMA4D. This is the viewport. It's where you're going to see what you're doing to the build, and it's where you're going to be able to see the renders and the test renders you make. This is the material tab. It's where all your materials are going to be displayed. This is the coordinates tab. It's where the coordinate of the element you selected are going to be displayed. This is the list of all the elements you added to the scene are going to be listed here, shown here. This is the parameters for the element you selected. So for example, right now I'm in the project. I'm clicking in the viewport, so it's giving me these general parameters. These you don't really need to worry for basic render, and these are all the tools you're going to be able to use to make the render. This is undo. This is scale, move, scale, and rotate. This is render in the viewport. This is for the final render. When you finish the render and everything is how you want it, you're going to click on this, and it's going to it's going to start the render in the picture viewer. This is render settings, which we're going to see later. These you don't need to worry about. And this is the camera. This is the light, all the lights, light types. And this contains a few useful elements like an infinite floor and the sky, or environment, which is fog. Let me just add an element to show you how this works. So I just click on the cube, like this. Right now I have the move tool selected, so I can move it along the 3-axis, like so. If I click on the scale tool, I can scale it up, or scale up just one side, like so. And this is the rotate tool, so I can rotate the cube, like so, like so, like so, or along all axes. You can see it's listed as in my list as the cube element. You have all the properties and the parameters of that object, like the size, segments you don't need to worry about, etc. At the moment it doesn't have a material, so this is the default CINEMA4D material. If you want to add one to it, just click on create, new material, take this default material and drop it here. And there we go. So the next thing we need to do is import the build into the program. So take the OBJ you had, drag it and drop it into CINEMA4D. You have two parameters you need to keep in mind here, scale and material. Material is gonna needs to be an import.mtl file, or otherwise it's not gonna import the materials correctly. Scale is important because it's gonna matter if you add other 3D elements to the scene. For example, a character rig, which is how you animate a character. It's usually gonna be on the scale of 1 meter. So if you want to do that, you need to make sure your build is scaled to 1 meter. So for render, and we don't need to do any animation, I'm just gonna put it in 1 centimeter and click OK, and it's gonna start importing. As you can see, the build is now imported. Okay, perfect. But if we zoom in here, you can see the materials look really weird. And this is because we need to fix them. They're not loaded in properly yet. So just take any of the materials here, click on it, left click on it, do Control A, Control A. Okay, now it's selected all the materials, and let's go in the parameter tab. You want to go to basic, untick reflectance, and tick alpha. So now we have two channels, color and alpha, in the materials. Channels are properties in a way of the material. We only need the color and the transparency, which is alpha. Okay, going to color, it's already loaded in here. The only thing you need to change is the sampling to none, so the blocks aren't blurry. Next, go to alpha. Click on the little 3 dots. Click on the RGBA we had, like so, and change the sampling to none as well. Perfect. Now you can still see the blocks are a bit blurry in the preview, so in the viewport I mean. So go to editor, texture preview size, change this from default to no scaling. Awesome. So now we're going to be able to start making the render. Go to render settings. This is the first thing you want to change. There's 3 main renderers in CINEMA4D by default. There's standard, physical, and pro render. Standard and physical are pretty similar, but for this tutorial we're going to use physical because it offers a few elements that are easier to use as a beginner. Just click on it and there you go. The 2 effects we're going to need to make a render are ambient occlusion and global illumination, who usually go hand in hand. Okay, the first tab you need to look at is output. It's gonna give you the width, gonna let you select the width and the height of the image. If you're making a test render, I suggest using a smaller size so you can render it faster. Otherwise, when you're done, just pick the final resolution you want and you're good. Don't confuse these settings with the resolution here. This only matters if you want to print the render. Save tab is where you can select the path to where you want to save the render once it's done rendering. Usually you want to save in a format of PNG or EXR, but just use PNG for the moment, it's easier for you. Depth, you want to use 16-bit, this means it has more colors into the image. Okay, awesome. Next thing we need to go to is the physical tab. Here you can select depth of field if you want it to be activated. We do, so I'm just gonna take it and I'll show you later how it works. Sampler is the quality of the render. When you're making test render, I suggest keeping it on low or medium, but when you're doing the final render, you can even go on high. Perfect. Now the sampler, it has two modes that are interesting to us. So adaptive means it's gonna render the image bit by bit by buckets. This is good for the final render when you want every part of the image treated equally. But there's also the progressive mode, which is going to render the image progressively and make it more refined as time goes on. This is useful for previews while you're setting up the render. Let's stick to progressive for the moment. Go into ambient occlusion. This is the little shadow that's in between the blocks on the edges. You want to leave everything as is because it's good like it is. Just tick on evaluate transparency. Next, go to global illumination. There's two methods you can choose. Global illumination is the indirect illumination. Primary method is going to be the first few bounces. I suggest QMC because, in my opinion, it's the best. It's the most accurate one. The secondary method, I use light mapping, which is because it's quite fast and it works. This is the multiple indirect bounces after the first few ones. So light mapping, maximum depth go to 1 to 8, and for the gamma you can leave it on 1. Samples once again is the quality of the global illumination. For a test render you can keep it on medium, and even for the final render medium is fine, it's enough. Okay, awesome. One useful practice I do usually is make these two bars on the top and the bottom darker or another color, so I can see what's actually being rendered and what's out of the frame. So I do Shift V, and this opens the viewport parameters. Here I can change the opacity of those two bars, and I can change the color. I like having it on white. Awesome. So now we're going to be able to add our camera and lights. So let's just click on this, and now you have a camera. If you want to go into the camera, you click on this little square, and now you're in the camera, and you can select what the camera sees. Let's go over here. Awesome. And now let's add a light to the scene. What I think is the best light for a sun in CINEMA4D and physical would be the area light. So I just click on this. Awesome. By default you can see it's a huge rectangle. There's a few things to keep in mind with lights. So the bigger the light, the more diffuse the shadows are going to be, and as opposed to if the light is very small, the shadows are going to be very sharp. And one other thing you need to keep in mind is the closer the light is to the object or to the build, the more intense it's going to be. And one last tip is the light is facing where the blue arrow is. So if the blue arrow is this way, then all the light is going to go this way. Alright? At the moment our area light is in the build, so it's not going to brighten anything up. At the moment it's a square, which is a bit of a bother because it's going to emit light only in this direction. Because it's a sun, I wanted to emit light in all directions. So I just go in details, change the area shape from rectangle to a sphere. Awesome. As I said before, the sharpness of the shadows depend on the scale of and the size of the light. In general, I like quite sharp shadows, so I can change the size to 15 on all axes. Awesome, it's right here. Okay, now we have our sun. Let's place it somewhere behind the build, maybe, and above a bit, so we can get some nice light hitting in front. Okay. Now, if we render this as is, you're gonna see it looks a bit weird. So this is the pre-pass. It means it's gonna calculate all the necessary stuff. Yeah. Okay. Now we're in progressive pass. This means it's rendering the image as it is. You can see the lighting is very diffuse. The shadows are a bit too dark. It doesn't look very good. This is because of a few things. First of all, you haven't selected a shadow type, so it's not giving actual shadows. Let's change this here. You click on the light, you go to shadow and area. Awesome. Next, the intensity of the light we said was very minimal. So we have to change this to, let's say, 150, and maybe give it a bit of a yellow tint. Something here, yellow-orange. Not too much, because otherwise it doesn't look great. The last thing is that the shadows were too dark. This is because of global illumination, and let's not get into the details, but basically it doesn't have anything to reflect off, so we need to give it something around the build so it can reflect off. So let's add a sky. You can click on this and sky. Okay, now we have a new element called the sky here. You want to give it a color, so you want to go to create, new material, double click on this, which is essentially the same as going here and looking in the parameters here. Untick reflectance, you don't need it. Just tick color, go to texture and give it a gradient. Go into the gradient, change this to 2D V, which means it's gonna go up. And let's pick a blue color. So let's go to, for example, 280, 247 and 20. That's a pretty good color. And the final color would be 205, 27 and 70. This is just a gradient I really like. Doesn't have to be the same, just it's one I like. Next you have to take this material, drag it and put it on the sky. Awesome. Now when we render this, you're gonna see it looks much better. So again, it's doing the pre-pass, which is all the calculations, and now a progressive pass, which means we're in the actual render. So you can see it looks much better. At the moment the light isn't hitting much, so let me just move the light. Let me just push it a bit. Awesome. And now we should see more. It's calculating again. Rendering takes a lot of time, so you have to be patient. Awesome. So now it's a bit dark, but it's fine. We can always fix it in Photoshop. And same for the highlights. They look a bit dull, but that's nothing we can't fix. Next thing. So I mentioned depth of field earlier in physical. If you remember, it was here. I selected it, but I didn't do anything else. So now is when we're going to select the settings for that. You need to go into camera, focus this in object and focus distance, and just click on this little arrow, and if it's black it means you can select the focus point. Let's select something around here, just click, and now it's set. To select how much blur you want to give it, you need to go to physical tab, change the f-stop. So this is like a DSLR camera, if you're familiar with it. The smaller the f-stop, the more blur you have. So for example, if I put it on 1, that's gonna be a lot of blur. So let's look at, let's see what it looks like. You can see a bit of blur here. Let's put it on 0.1 to really prove the point. Yeah, you can see now there's a lot of blur in front and in the back. The depth of field is up to your preference. I don't like having too much depth of field like this. Let's just keep it on, say, 1. Awesome. I actually think it looks a little bit dark, so let's go into global illumination tab and change the gamma from 1 to 1.5. And let's look at what it looks like. It looks a bit brighter now, which is better. Great, awesome. You can even make the light a bit brighter. So let's go 200 for example. Render it again. And now as you see, you have darker shadows and bright highlights, and that's exactly what we need. Perfect. So now you have a render and you're ready to make the final render, the clean one. So to do this, the first thing you may want to change is the width and height to give it a better resolution. So you can lock the ratio and let's say 1920 by 1080, which is a good, decent standard resolution. For save, let's select the path to where I have my folder. So let me copy it and paste it here and give it a name. So for example, render. Okay, awesome. I may want to change my sky in post-production, which is in Photoshop. So I can take alpha channel and it's gonna make everything but the build transparent. Next thing is go to physical, and we need to change the sampler from progressive to adaptive. The sampling quality is on medium, that's fine, that's enough. One thing I would change though is blurriness subdivision. I'd like to put it on 4. Awesome. And global illumination is on medium, that's perfectly fine. Okay. So now you have everything you need for your render. You can just hit on this render to picture viewer button, and it's going to take you to the final render. So let's just click on this and you can see this new window popped up. And now it's going to render your actual render. And you can see, as I said, adaptive is little buckets that turn around and it's going to render the final frame. You can see it's pretty sharp here. Okay, awesome. So it finished rendering in 8 minutes and 40 seconds, which is pretty good for a 1080p render. This is with the settings I gave you, so you can see they're pretty fast. Okay, so it finished the render and it saved automatically to my folder that I specified earlier, like this, and with a transparent background. Awesome. So this is what I got after a quick edit. Just to show you the possibilities with that type of render and what you can do with it. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I will be making more in the future. If you enjoyed, please leave a like and share it with the rest of the community, because I would really like more people to know how to render. Thank you for watching, and bye.